The storm that lashed the Carpathian Mountains on that October night carried more than rain and thunder. It carried whispers of ancient malice, the kind that seeps through stone and settles in the marrow of mortal bones. In the village of Bistritz, huddled beneath the shadow of distant peaks, the people bolted their doors and hung garlic above their thresholds, muttering prayers that had lost their potency centuries ago. But in the great hall of Castle Dracula, perched like a predator's claw upon the highest cliff, there was no prayer. There was only laughter, cold, mirthless, and echoing through vaulted chambers where the light of torches could not fully penetrate the darkness. Count Dracula stood before the massive stone fireplace, his tall figure casting a shadow that seemed to move independently of his body. His pale fingers, long and aristocratic, drummed against the mantelpiece with a rhythm that mimicked a dying heartbeat. His eyes, dark as the void between stars, fixed upon the three figures gathered before him. "You bore me," he said, his voice a velvet blade. "Centuries upon centuries, and still you offer me nothing but the same tedious entertainments. Blood, seduction, terror, these things have lost their savor." The three vampire brides stirred in their gossamer gowns, their beauty terrible and perfect. The eldest, Alira, stepped forward, her alabaster skin gleaming in the firelight. "My lord, we live only to please you. Tell us what amusement you desire, and we shall procure it." Dracula turned from the fire, and the temperature in the hall seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Amusement? You speak as if I were some bored nobleman seeking diversion from court intrigues. I am beyond amusement. I am beyond pleasure. I have tasted every sin, broken every covenant, and still, I feel nothing but the hollow ache of eternity." Verona, the second bride, glided closer, her movements serpentine. "Then perhaps, my lord, you seek not amusement, but challenge, something that tests even your infinite will." The count's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a creature capable of joy. "A challenge, yes. But what challenge remains for one who has conquered death itself?" It was Marischka, the youngest and most impulsive of the three, who spoke the words that would set fate into motion. "The challenge of the impossible, my lord, not the conquest of strength, but the corruption of purity, not the breaking of the proud, but the degradation of the already broken." Dracula's eyes narrowed with interest. "Continue." Marischka's red lips parted, revealing teeth too white and too sharp. "In the village below there dwells a woman named Marguerite Ashford. She is the daughter of a deceased English merchant who settled here 20 years past. The villagers mock her openly, for she is large of body, grotesquely so by their petty standards. They call her the English cow and the merchant's mistake. Even the poorest farmer would not take her to wife. And you think this interests me?" Dracula's voice held a dangerous edge. "She is more than simply rejected, my lord," Alira interjected, seeing where Marischka's thread was leading. "She is pious, devoutly so. Every morning she attends the chapel, every evening she tends the poor, and every night she prays for the souls of the damned, even yours, my lord, though she has never seen you. She prays for me." For the first time in decades, genuine curiosity flickered across the count's features. "For all lost souls," Verona confirmed. "The village priest, Father Vasile, speaks of her as if she were a saint among sinners. Her faith is unshakable, her compassion boundless. And yet, and this is the delicious irony, she is utterly alone. No one loves her. No one desires her. She is scorned for the very body that houses such purity." The hall fell silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the distant howling of wolves. Dracula stood motionless, his mind turning over the possibilities like a chess master, considering an unexpected gambit. "You propose what exactly?" he finally asked. Marischka's eyes gleamed with wicked delight. "A wager, my lord. Take her as your bride, not through force or enchantment, but through the mockery of marriage itself. Court her as a nobleman would. Wed her in the church she so loves. Bring her here to this castle, and see how long her faith endures when confronted with the reality of what you are. Make her believe she is loved," Alira added, her voice dripping with venom. "Let her taste hope, perhaps for the first time in her miserable existence, and then reveal the truth, that it was all a cruel game, that even a monster found her too pathetic to desire genuinely. Break not her body, but her spirit. Shatter her faith. Prove that even the purest heart can be corrupted when shown that God himself has abandoned them." Dracula was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost contemplative. "You wish me to destroy her through kindness, to offer her everything she has been denied, then tear it away, to prove that even compassion can be weaponized. Precisely, my lord, Verona purred. Is that not a challenge worthy of your attention? The seduction of the body is simple, but the corruption of a soul that genuinely believes in redemption, even yours, that is an art form. The Count walked to the tall window that overlooked the village far below. Lights flickered in the darkness like dying stars. Somewhere among those humble dwellings, a woman knelt in prayer, her faith a small candle against the overwhelming night. Very well, Dracula said. I accept your wager. Within 3 months, I shall take this Marguerite Ashford as my bride. I shall court her, marry her, and bring her to this castle. And before the year ends, I shall extinguish that light of faith you claim burns so brightly within her. She will beg for damnation. She will curse the God she so faithfully serves. And she will do so not because I forced her, but because she will choose darkness over the unbearable pain of hope betrayed. The 3 brides laughed, a sound like breaking glass in a tomb. But hear me well, the Count continued, turning to face them. If I fail, if by some miracle this mortal woman's faith remains intact, then I shall release her unharmed and grant her safe passage from this land, along with wealth enough to live comfortably for the remainder of her days. You shall not fail, my lord, Alira said confidently. No mortal can withstand such cruelty disguised as love. It is the most perfect torture. Dracula's expression revealed nothing. We shall see. Prepare my finest clothes. Tomorrow night I descend to the village as Count Vladislaus Draculesti, nobleman seeking a wife, and you 3 shall remain here, unseen and unheard, until I summon you. This game must be played with precision. As the brides departed, their laughter echoing through the corridors, Dracula remained at the window. His reflection, or rather the absence of it, stared back from the dark glass. Somewhere in his chest, where a heart had once beat warm and human, there was the faintest stirring of something he could not name. Was it anticipation, curiosity, or perhaps, buried beneath centuries of death and damnation, the tiniest ember of the man he had once been, wondering if faith could truly withstand the darkness? He would soon find out. The next evening, as the sun set behind the Carpathian peaks and painted the sky in shades of blood and bruise, Marguerite Ashford knelt in the small chapel at the edge of Bistritz. The wooden pews were rough and worn, the altar simple and unadorned, but to her it was a sanctuary. She was a large woman, there was no denying it. Years of emotional eating, combined with a body that seemed determined to store every morsel, as if preparing for perpetual famine, had left her with a frame that society deemed unacceptable. Her face, however, held a gentle beauty that most never bothered to see. Soft brown eyes that radiated kindness, a full mouth that smiled easily despite having little reason to, and skin that, though not fashionably pale, glowed with health and cleanliness. Her dress was simple but immaculate, sewn by her own hands from fabric she could afford. She wore no jewelry, save for a small wooden cross that had belonged to her mother. Her hands, clasped in prayer, were rough from work. She supported herself by taking in laundry and mending, as no respectable household would hire her for any position that required being seen. "Dear Lord," she whispered in English, her native tongue feeling more natural for prayer than the Romanian she spoke in daily life, "I thank you for another day of life and breath. I pray for Father Vasile and his continued health. I pray for the villagers, that their harvest be plentiful and their children healthy. And I pray for the lost souls who walk in darkness, that they might find their way back to your light, no matter how far they have strayed." She did not pray for a husband. She had long ago accepted that such things were not meant for her. She did not pray for beauty or transformation. She had made peace with the body God had given her. She prayed only for the strength to continue loving in a world that had shown her so little love in return. "Marguerite," she startled at the sound of her name, spoken in a voice like aged wine and distant thunder. Rising from her knees, she turned toward the chapel entrance. There, silhouetted against the dying light, stood the most magnificent man she had ever seen. He was tall, extraordinarily so, with a commanding presence that seemed to fill the small chapel, despite the vast emptiness of the space. His clothing was that of a nobleman, a long black coat with silver fastenings, a crimson vest, and a white shirt that seemed to glow against the darkness of his attire. His hair was dark and swept back from a face of aristocratic beauty, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were so deep and dark they seemed to contain entire universes. But it was not his appearance that struck her most. It was the profound sadness that emanated from him, a sorrow so deep and ancient that it made her heart ache with instinctive compassion. "Forgive me," the stranger said, his accent carrying hints of old nobility and foreign lands. "I did not mean to disturb your prayers. I am out seeking guidance and was told I might find wisdom here." Marguerite felt her cheeks flush. No man of such obvious station had ever addressed her directly, let alone sought her out. "I am no one of importance, sir. Perhaps you seek Father Vasile. He is the priest of this parish." "Father Vasile is attending to a dying parishioner on the other side of the village," the man replied, stepping into the chapel. As he moved, Marguerite noticed he walked with the fluid grace of a predator, yet there was no menace in his approach. "His housekeeper informed me I might find a woman of great faith here, a woman named Marguerite Ashford. Are you she?" "I am," she admitted, confused and increasingly nervous. "But I do not understand why a nobleman would seek me out. If you require laundry services or mending—" "I require neither," he interrupted gently. "I am Count Vladislaus Draculesti, and I have returned to these lands after many years abroad. In my travels, I have seen much of the world and much of human nature. I have witnessed beauty and horror, kindness and cruelty, faith and faithlessness, and I have come to a point in my life where I find myself searching." "Searching for what, my lord?" Marguerite asked, her natural compassion overriding her nervousness. Dracula moved closer, and she caught the faint scent of something ancient and indefinable, like old books and distant storms. For meaning, for purpose, for something beyond the endless repetition of days that blur into years. "I have been told you are a woman of exceptional faith. I wish to understand how you maintain such conviction in a world that offers so much evidence against divine benevolence." It was such an unexpected question that Marguerite found herself responding honestly, without the careful guardedness she usually employed. "I maintain faith, not because the world is kind, my lord, but because faith is what allows me to be kind in an unkind world. Without it, I fear I would drown in bitterness and despair." "Yet the world has not been kind to you," Dracula observed, his eyes studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "I have heard how the villagers speak of you, with mockery, with disdain." Marguerite's expression remained serene, though a flicker of pain crossed her features. "They speak from their own pain and fear, my lord. People who are comfortable with themselves do not need to tear down others to feel elevated. I have learned not to mistake their cruelty for truth." "Remarkable," the Count murmured, and for a moment something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest hint of respect. "You possess a wisdom that eludes most who live 10 times your years." "I am 28, my lord," Marguerite said. "Not so young as to be naive, nor so old as to be bitter, though I suspect I seem ancient to someone of your obvious vitality." "You might be surprised," Dracula replied cryptically. Then, with a slight bow, he added, "Might I walk with you back to your home? The night grows dark, and these roads are not safe for one traveling alone." Marguerite hesitated. Every instinct of propriety screamed that this was inappropriate. A noblewoman walking unescorted with a strange nobleman would be scandalous enough, but she was no noblewoman, and the scandal would fall entirely on her already burdened shoulders. Yet something in his eyes, that deep, unfathomable sadness, called to the part of her that could never turn away from suffering, no matter its form. "Very well, my lord," she agreed. "Though I warn you, my home is humble, and being seen with me will not enhance your reputation in the village." As they stepped out into the night, the Count offered his arm. When she took it, she felt the coldness of his skin even through the fabric of his coat. A chill ran through her, but she attributed it to the mountain air. Above them, clouds obscured the moon, and in the darkness between the stars, ancient eyes watched the first moves in a game that would determine not just the fate of one woman's soul, but perhaps the remnant of humanity in a creature who had long ago surrendered his own. The village of Bistritz had not witnessed such scandal in living memory. For 3 weeks, Count Vladislaus Draculesti had courted Marguerite Ashford with a devotion that defied all logic and propriety. He arrived each evening at sunset, always impeccably dressed, always bearing some small gift, a book of poetry, a spray of night-blooming jasmine, once even a music box that played a haunting melody from lands far to the east. The villagers watched with mouths agape and minds churning with speculation. Some whispered that the Count must be mad, others that Marguerite had bewitched him with dark magic. The cruelest suggested he was playing an elaborate joke, courting the ugliest woman in the village as sport, before revealing the mockery and breaking her heart publicly. But if it was a joke, the Count played it with extraordinary commitment. Marguerite's small cottage, little more than 3 rooms with walls that let in winter drafts, had become an unlikely center of attention. Each evening, the Count would arrive in his black carriage, pulled by horses whose eyes seemed to reflect red in the lamplight. He would knock upon her door with formal courtesy, and she would emerge, always clean and presentable, but never able to hide the poverty of her circumstances or the abundance of her body. And each evening, he would offer his arm as if she were a princess, and walk with her through the village square, past the staring eyes and whispered words, utterly indifferent to the judgment of lesser mortals. On this particular evening, as October gave way to November and the first snow dusted the Carpathian peaks, Marguerite sat at her small wooden table, hands folded, watching the Count as he examined the modest interior of her home. "You live simply," he observed, running one pale finger along the spine of a well-worn Bible on her shelf. "I live within my means, my lord," Marguerite replied. "I need little to be content." Dracula turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You say that as if contentment were a choice rather than a consequence of circumstances. Is it not?" she asked gently. "I have known wealthy merchants who were miserable despite their gold, and poor farmers who found joy in their children's laughter. Contentment comes from within, not without." "Spoken like someone who has never truly possessed wealth," the Count said, but there was no cruelty in his voice, only observation. "Tell me, Marguerite, if you could have anything in this world, what would you ask for?" She was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously rather than offering the expected platitude. "I would ask for the ability to ease suffering wherever I found it, not through grand gestures or miracles, but through small acts of compassion that remind people they are seen, they are valued, and they are loved by God, even when the world has forgotten them." Dracula sat down across from her, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable, if not for the genuine curiosity behind it. "You truly mean that? You would not ask for beauty, or love, or escape from this place?" "Beauty is fleeting, my lord. Love cannot be demanded, only given freely. And this place is my home. Why would I wish to escape it?" She smiled, and in that moment her entire face transformed, radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with physical appearance. "Besides, if God wished me to be beautiful, he would have made me so. If he wished me to be loved, he would have prepared a heart to love me, and if he wished me elsewhere, he would have provided the means. I trust his plan, even when I cannot understand it." "And if his plan includes suffering?" Dracula pressed, leaning forward. "If he has condemned you to a life of loneliness and mockery, what then?" "Then I will bear it with as much grace as I can manage," Marguerite answered, meeting his gaze without flinching. "And I will trust that suffering has purpose, even if that purpose is simply to teach me compassion for others who suffer." For a long moment, the Count was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "I have lived a very long time, Marguerite. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed saints become sinners and sinners become saints. But I have rarely encountered faith as unshakable as yours. It fascinates me, and if I am honest, it troubles me." "Why would it trouble you, my lord?" "Because it suggests there is something in this world that cannot be corrupted or destroyed, and I have spent many years believing that everything, everyone, has a breaking point. That, given the right pressure, any soul will shatter." Marguerite reached across the table, and in a gesture that surprised them both, placed her hand over his. His skin was cold as marble, but she did not pull away. "Perhaps you have been looking in the wrong places, my lord, or perhaps you have forgotten that strength is not the absence of breaking, but the will to mend oneself afterward, again and again, no matter how many times the world tries to break you." Dracula stared at their joined hands, her warm, work-roughened fingers resting on his pale, lifeless ones. Something stirred in the hollow place where his heart had once beat. It was not pleasant. It felt like the first thaw after an endless winter, when frozen ground begins to crack and bleed. He pulled his hand away, rising from the chair with fluid grace. "I have a proposition for you, Marguerite Ashford." She looked up at him, confusion and a hint of apprehension crossing her features. "My lord, marry me." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended above a thread. Marguerite's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally she managed, I do not understand. This must be some manner of jest." "I assure you I am in deadly earnest." Dracula moved to the window, looking out at the darkening village. "I am a man of considerable means but no family. My castle stands empty, save for servants. I have traveled the world seeking something I could not name, and in these past weeks I have come to believe that what I seek might be found in the most unlikely of places." "But why me?" Marguerite asked, standing now, her voice trembling slightly. You could have any woman in Europe, noble women of great beauty and refinement. Why would you choose someone like me? Dracula turned to face her, and in the lamplight, his features seemed almost carved from shadow itself. Because beautiful noble women have been boring me for centuries. They are predictable, vain, shallow. They offer nothing but physical pleasure and political alliance. But you offer something I had forgotten existed. Genuine goodness, unshakable faith, a soul that has not been corrupted by the world's cruelties despite having every reason to become bitter and cruel. He crossed the room until he stood before her, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I will not lie to you, Marguerite. I am not a good man. I have done things that would horrify you. I have darkness in me that you cannot begin to imagine. But perhaps, in your presence I might remember what it was to be human, to feel something other than emptiness. And in return I can offer you a life free from poverty and mockery, a castle where you would be mistress, servants to attend you. The means to help those you wish to help on a scale your current circumstances could never allow. Marguerite's mind reeled. It was too much, too sudden, too impossible. And yet, as she looked into those ancient, sorrowful eyes, she saw something that made her hesitate before refusing outright. She saw genuine need, not desire, not lust, but a desperate hunger for something beyond the physical. You ask me to marry you, but you do not speak of love, she said quietly. Love is a word used to dress up baser instincts, Dracula replied. I offer you something more honest, need. I need what you represent, light in darkness, hope in despair, proof that not everything in this world is corrupt. And what would you offer me in return? Truly, everything, he said simply. Protection, comfort, the means to do all the good works your heart desires. And perhaps, if you are very fortunate or very unfortunate, the love you claim not to ask for might grow between us. I make no promises, but I do not deny the possibility. Marguerite turned away, her mind a whirlwind. Every rational thought screamed that this was madness. He was a stranger. The courtship had been brief. There was something about him that felt wrong on an instinctive level. The coldness of his skin, the way he never seemed to arrive before sunset or linger past dawn, the unsettling absence of servants despite his claims of wealth. But there was also the memory of his hand in hers, and the bone-deep loneliness she had seen in his eyes, the recognition of a fellow sufferer, someone who bore wounds invisible to the casual observer. And there was the practical reality of her situation. She was 28. Her small savings were nearly depleted. The villagers were growing less willing to give her work, as if poverty and unattractiveness might be contagious. She had perhaps 5 years before she would be truly destitute, dependent on charity, that would be grudgingly given if given at all. I need time to consider, she said finally, and I need to pray on this. It is not a decision to be made lightly. Of course. Dracula moved toward the door, then paused. But do not take too long, Marguerite. Winter is coming, and these mountains are harsh to those without adequate shelter. I would not see you suffer unnecessarily, while pride or fear holds you back from accepting help. After he left, Marguerite sank to her knees before her small altar. Nothing more than a wooden cross and a candle. She prayed for guidance, for clarity, for some sign of what God's will might be in this impossible situation. But the only answer she received was the memory of the Count's eyes and the terrible loneliness she had seen reflected there, a loneliness that matched her own. 3 days later, Father Vasile sat across from Marguerite in the small rectory, his weathered face grave with concern. You cannot be serious, my child, the old priest said, his hands trembling slightly as they gripped his rosary. This man, this Count, there is something deeply wrong about him. I can feel it in my very bones. He has been nothing but courteous and generous, Father, Marguerite protested. He speaks of darkness in his past, but who among us is without sin? Is it not our Christian duty to offer redemption to those who seek it? Redemption is offered by God, not by a young woman sacrificing herself to a man who may be dangerous. Father Vasile stood pacing the small room. Marguerite, I have been a priest in these mountains for 40 years. I know the old stories. I know the legends that the educated mock but the wise fear. This Count Draculesti, there are whispers of his family name, dark whispers. Whispers are not truth, Father. No, but neither are they always lies. The priest sat down again, taking her hands in his. Listen to me. I do not say this to be cruel, but you must understand the reality. You are vulnerable because you are lonely. because you have been rejected by this community in ways that shame us all. This man, if he is a man, may be preying upon that vulnerability, using your goodness against you." Marguerite felt tears prick her eyes. "And what if he is? What if this is all some elaborate cruelty? I have lived 28 years being mocked and dismissed. At least, if he breaks my heart, I will have known, however briefly, what it feels like to be wanted, to be chosen. Is that not worth the risk?" Father Vasile's expression softened with profound sadness. "Oh, my child, your heart breaks mine. You deserve so much more than to be chosen by someone who may only wish to destroy you." "But what if he doesn't?" she whispered. "What if, beneath all that darkness and sadness, there is a soul crying out for salvation? What if God has placed me in his path, not as a victim but as an instrument of his grace? Would you have me turn away from that calling simply because it is frightening?" The priest was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sighed deeply. "You have always had a martyr's heart, Marguerite. I have seen it in how you care for those who give you nothing in return, how you pray for those who mock you, and I fear that this quality, which makes you so dear to God, may also lead you into great danger." "Then you will not perform the ceremony?" Father Vasile closed his eyes. "I did not say that. If you are determined to walk this path, I will not abandon you to face it without the Church's blessing. But I will pray for you, my child. I will pray as I have never prayed before, that God will protect you from whatever darkness dwells in that castle on the mountain. Thank you, Father." Marguerite squeezed his hands. "I know this seems like madness. Perhaps it is. But I feel in my heart that this is what I am meant to do, that somehow impossibly I am meant to try to bring light into his darkness. And if the darkness is too strong, if it consumes your light rather than being diminished by it," she smiled, though tears rolled down her cheeks, "then at least I will have tried, and God will judge me by my intentions, not my success." The wedding took place on the first day of December, in the small chapel where Marguerite had prayed every day of her adult life. The villagers came, not out of joy, but out of morbid curiosity, filling the pews with whispers and stares. Marguerite wore a dress she had sewn herself from white fabric the Count had provided, simple but elegant, designed to fit her body rather than mock it. She had woven winter roses into her hair, pale blooms that seemed to glow against her dark locks. When she walked down the aisle, she saw the Count waiting at the altar, dressed in black and crimson, his pale face solemn, and for just a moment she allowed herself to believe that this was real, that this impossible thing was happening, that she was wanted. Father Vasile performed the ceremony with a heavy heart, his voice steady despite his fears. When the time came for vows, Dracula spoke his in a voice that echoed through the chapel like distant thunder. "I, Vladislaus Draculesti, take you, Marguerite Ashford, to be my wife. I vow to protect you, to provide for you, and to honor the faith that dwells within you, even when I cannot share it." Marguerite's voice was softer, but no less certain. "I, Marguerite Ashford, take you, Vladislaus Draculesti, to be my husband. I vow to stand beside you, to offer you compassion without judgment, and to pray for your soul as I pray for my own, that we both might find our way to grace." When the Count placed the ring upon her finger, a band of ancient silver set with a ruby the color of heart's blood, his hand was steady, but Marguerite felt the faintest tremor pass through him. "So you may kiss your bride," Father Vasile said, the words heavy with foreboding. Dracula leaned down, and for the first time his lips touched hers. They were cold, impossibly cold, like kissing winter itself, but they were also gentle, almost reverent, as if he feared she might shatter under too much pressure. When they pulled apart, Marguerite saw something flicker across his face, surprise perhaps, or the ghost of an emotion he had thought long dead. Outside the chapel, snow had begun to fall thick and heavy. The Count's carriage waited, black as a hearse, attended by a driver whose face Marguerite could not quite see beneath his hood. "Come," Dracula said, offering his hand. "Your new home awaits." As Marguerite climbed into the carriage, she cast one last look at the village she had known all her adult life. Father Vasile stood at the chapel door, making the sign of the cross. A few villagers watched with expressions ranging from pity to satisfaction at seeing the outcast finally removed from their midst. The carriage door closed with a sound like a tomb sealing, and they began the long journey up the mountain toward Castle Dracula. Marguerite did not know it yet, but in the shadows of that castle, 3 vampire brides watched their approach with hatred and hunger in their dead hearts. And in the deepest crypt, Ancient forces stirred, disturbed by the presence of genuine faith entering walls that had known only damnation for centuries. The game had moved beyond the Count's control, for in marrying Marguerite, he had brought into his domain the one thing that terrified creatures of darkness more than any weapon, the incorruptible light of a soul that refused to be extinguished. The carriage climbed through the mountains as darkness swallowed the world. Marguerite sat across from her new husband, watching the landscape transform through the window. Bare trees became skeletal fingers clawing at the sky, rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and the path grew narrower until it seemed impossible that the carriage could continue. Yet continue it did, pulled by horses that never seemed to tire, driven by a coachman who never spoke. "Are you frightened?" Dracula asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the village. Marguerite turned from the window to meet his gaze. In the confined space of the carriage, she could see him more clearly than ever before. The unnatural pallor of his skin, the way shadows seemed to cling to him even in the lamplight, the fact that his chest did not rise and fall with breath. "Yes," she admitted, "but not of you." His eyebrows rose slightly. "No? Then what frightens you?" "Failure," she said simply. "I have promised to be your wife, to stand beside you, to offer you compassion. I fear that I may not be strong enough to keep those promises when I learn the full truth of what you are." A long silence followed. When Dracula finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against her chest. "You suspect I am not human." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "I suspect you are not fully human, yes. The cold of your skin, the way you avoid daylight, the sadness that seems to carry the weight of centuries. I am not a fool, my lord, nor am I blind to the obvious. And yet you married me anyway. I married you because I believe every soul deserves a chance at redemption, even, perhaps especially, those who believe themselves beyond saving." Dracula leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into hers. "What if I told you that I am damned, that I have committed acts of such horror that no amount of prayer or compassion could wash away the stain, that I am a creature who has fed on human blood, who has murdered countless innocents, who has reveled in death and darkness for more years than you can imagine?" Marguerite's heart hammered in her chest, but she did not look away. "Then I would say that Christ died for sinners, not saints. That no sin is too great for God's mercy if the sinner genuinely seeks forgiveness. And I would ask you, do you seek forgiveness, my lord, or are you content with damnation?" For a moment, something raw and terrible flickered across the Count's face. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual mask of aristocratic composure. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps both," Marguerite said with a slight smile. "But I am also your wife now, for better or worse, and I take my vows seriously." The carriage lurched to a stop. Outside, Castle Dracula loomed against the night sky like a monument to despair. Its towers clawed at the clouds. Its walls were black stone that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the moonlight, and from its highest windows no light shone. "Welcome to your new home," Dracula said, opening the carriage door and stepping out into the cold. He offered his hand to help her down, and Marguerite took it, stepping onto ground that seemed to pulse with ancient malice. The castle's main doors were massive things of iron-bound oak, covered in carvings of tormented figures and writhing serpents. As they opened, seemingly of their own accord, Marguerite whispered a prayer under her breath. The interior was even more oppressive than the exterior. The entrance hall was vast, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting battles and bloodshed in faded crimson and black. Suits of armor stood like silent sentinels, and the eyes of painted portraits seemed to follow their movement. But what struck Marguerite most was the cold, not merely the absence of heat, but a spiritual coldness that seemed to seep into her bones and wrap around her heart. "I know it is not welcoming," Dracula said, watching her reaction. "The castle has stood empty of true life for many years. But you may redecorate as you see fit. I place no restrictions on your authority here. You are the mistress of Castle Dracula now." Before Marguerite could respond, a sound echoed through the hall. Laughter, feminine and cruel, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Dracula's expression darkened. "Show yourselves." From the shadows they came, 3 women of terrible beauty. They moved with inhuman grace, their pale skin seeming to glow with its own light, their eyes reflecting red in the torchlight. They wore gowns of gossamer that revealed more than they concealed, and their lips were stained crimson. "My lord," the eldest purred, her voice like poisoned honey. "You have brought home a pet. How amusing." "Alira," Dracula's voice was a whip crack of command. "You will address your mistress with respect." The vampire bride laughed, a sound like breaking bells. "Mistress? This mortal cow? You cannot be serious, my lord. Surely this is still part of the game." Marguerite felt the words like physical blows, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet the creature's mocking gaze. "I am Marguerite Draculesti, and I am indeed the Count's wife. Whether you consider that amusing or not is irrelevant." The three brides circled her like wolves around wounded prey. The youngest, Marischka, reached out to touch Marguerite's hair, so warm, so alive. "Tell me, little mortal, do you know what your husband is? Do you know what we are?" "I know you are lost," Marguerite said quietly. "I know you have surrendered your humanity for a mockery of eternal life, and I know you are afraid." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Verona hissed, revealing fangs that gleamed like ivory daggers. "Afraid? We are immortal. We are powerful beyond your comprehension. What could we possibly fear from a pathetic mortal woman?" "The thing all dead things fear," Marguerite replied, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "The presence of genuine life, the reminder of what you have lost and can never reclaim." For a moment, Marguerite thought they would attack her. The bride's eyes blazed with hatred, their lips pulling back from their fangs. But Dracula stepped between them, his own power filling the room like an invisible wave. "Enough," he commanded. "You will retire to your chambers, and you will not approach my wife again without my explicit permission. Is that understood?" The brides glared at him with centuries of resentment, but they obeyed, melting back into the shadows like mist. Only Alira paused at the edge of darkness, turning back to look at Marguerite, with eyes that promised future suffering. "Enjoy your brief time here, little mortal," she whispered. "The game has only just begun." Then she was gone, and the hall was empty, save for Marguerite and her husband. "I apologize," Dracula said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "They were not supposed to reveal themselves yet. They have overstepped their bounds. They are your, what, concubines? Former wives?" Marguerite asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "They are nothing," Dracula replied flatly. "They are creatures I created in moments of weakness and loneliness. They serve at my pleasure and can be destroyed at my whim. You are my wife, Marguerite. You are mortal, yes, but you are also more human than they could ever hope to be again. Do not let their cruelty diminish you." Marguerite was quiet for a moment, processing the enormity of what she had just learned. Then, surprising even herself, she asked, "Will you make me like them?" Dracula turned to face her fully. "Is that what you want? Eternal life? Beauty that never fades? Power over mortals?" "No," she said immediately. "I was simply asking if that was your intention, if that was the purpose of this marriage, to transform me into one of your creatures." "The thought had occurred to me," Dracula admitted. "Before I met you, I imagined it might be amusing to offer you everything you had been denied: beauty, immortality, power, and watch how it corrupted you. But now—" "Now?" Marguerite prompted when he trailed off. "Now I find I do not wish to change you," he said quietly. "Your mortality, your faith, your compassion, these things make you what you are. To transform you would be to destroy the very qualities that I—" He stopped, seeming unsure how to finish the sentence. "That you what?" Marguerite asked gently. Instead of answering, Dracula turned and began walking toward the grand staircase. "Come, I will show you to your chambers. You must be exhausted from the journey." Marguerite followed him upstairs that seemed to go on forever, through corridors lined with doors that were better left unopened. Finally, they reached a suite of rooms that were less oppressive than the rest of the castle. The bedroom was large but not ostentatious, with a four-poster bed draped in deep blue velvet. There was a sitting room with a fireplace, a writing desk, and shelves lined with books. Most surprisingly, there was a small private chapel, complete with an altar, a crucifix, and candles. "I had this prepared for you," Dracula said. "I know your faith is important to you. I will not forbid you from practicing it, even here, though I confess the symbols cause me discomfort." Marguerite walked into the chapel, tears pricking her eyes at this unexpected kindness. She touched the crucifix gently, feeling its solid reality like an anchor in this place of shadows. "Thank you. This means more than you know. There are clothes in the wardrobe, all in your size. Servants will bring you food. Human servants, I assure you, not my bride creations. You may explore the castle freely during daylight hours, though I recommend you avoid the crypts and the eastern wing. And Marguerite, She turned to face him. "Lock your door at night. The brides are bound by my command not to harm you, but they are cunning and may seek to circumvent my orders in ways that are technically obedient but practically dangerous. Do not trust them. Do not speak with them if you can avoid it. And do not, under any circumstances, go wandering the castle after dark." "And where will you be?" she asked. "I have matters to attend to. Business that is best conducted in darkness. I will visit you tomorrow evening and we can talk. Learn more about each other. Begin this marriage properly." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You surprised me today, Marguerite. With the brides. Most mortals would have cowered or fled, but you spoke to them with courage and insight. It was impressive." "I have found that bullies are the same whether they are schoolyard children or immortal monsters," Marguerite replied. "They feed on fear. If you refuse to give them that satisfaction, they lose much of their power." A ghost of a smile touched Dracula's lips. "You may be wasted on this world, Marguerite Ashford. Draculesti, I should say. You have the soul of a warrior wrapped in the appearance of a gentle lamb." After he left, Marguerite locked the door as instructed and sank onto the bed. The enormity of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. She was married to a vampire. She was trapped in a castle with creatures who wanted her dead. And she had just told them she was unafraid when, in truth, she was terrified. But she had also seen something in her husband's eyes when he looked at her, something that gave her the faintest glimmer of hope. He had created the chapel for her. He had defended her against the brides. And he had admitted, however obliquely, that he valued what made her human. That was something. Perhaps not much, but something. Marguerite knelt before the altar in her small chapel and prayed until her knees ached and tears ran down her face. She prayed for strength, for wisdom, for protection. But most of all, she prayed for her husband, for the man he had once been, for the creature he had become, and for the possibility that somewhere in that darkness, a spark of his humanity still remained. In the depths of the castle, Dracula stood in his crypt, staring at the coffin where he would soon lie dormant until sunset. The encounter with Marguerite and the brides had disturbed him in ways he could not name. He had expected her to break already, to see the brides and run screaming, to beg for mercy or transformation. Instead, she had stood firm, had spoken truth to creatures who trafficked only in lies, and had somehow made them feel small. The game was not proceeding as planned, and what troubled him most was that he found himself hoping it would never go according to plan, that this mortal woman, with her unshakable faith and impossible compassion, might actually accomplish the impossible. She might save him from himself, or she might be consumed by the darkness trying. Either way, the hollow ache in his chest, the place where a heart had once beat, felt different now. It felt like the first stirrings of something he had not experienced in centuries. It felt like pain, real human pain, and for the first time in his undead existence, Count Dracula was not certain whether that was a curse or a blessing. The days in Castle Dracula passed with strange duality. During the daylight hours, when the Count lay dormant in his crypt, and the vampire brides retreated to their shadowed chambers, Marguerite explored her new domain with careful courage. The castle revealed itself slowly, like a book written in a language she was learning to read. There were wings filled with dust and decay, rooms that had not been opened in decades, and corridors that seemed to shift when she was not looking directly at them. But there were also unexpected treasures, a library with thousands of volumes in dozens of languages, a conservatory where moonflowers still bloomed despite decades of neglect, and a chapel far older than her private one, its altar cracked but still standing. What surprised her most, however, were the servants. She had expected thralls, mindless creatures bound to their master's will. Instead, she found a small collection of humans, elderly and worn, who moved through the castle with the weary resignation of prisoners who had long ago abandoned hope of escape. The first one she spoke to was an old woman named Katya, who brought her breakfast on the third morning. "Please," Marguerite said, as the woman set down the tray and turned to leave. "Stay a moment. I would like to talk with you." Katya froze, her weathered face showing confusion and fear. "The master does not like us speaking with guests, my lady. I am not a guest. I am the master's wife, and I am asking you to sit with me while I eat. Please." Slowly, as if expecting a trap, Katya lowered herself into a chair. Her hands trembled in her lap, and Marguerite could see the weight of years, perhaps decades, of fear etched into every line of her face. "How long have you been here?" Marguerite asked gently. 40 years, my lady. I came when I was 20, part of my village's tribute to the castle." "Tribute?" Marguerite's stomach turned. Each year the villagers send servants, young ones usually, to work in the castle and ensure the master's protection. Most do not last long. The brides feed on them, or they try to escape and die in the mountains. But some of us, we learn to be invisible, to serve and never question, to survive. Marguerite reached across the table and took the old woman's hand. Katya flinched at the touch but did not pull away. "That is no way to live. You are prisoners here." "We are alive, my lady. That is more than most can say who enter these walls." "But alive is not the same as living," Marguerite said. "Tell me, Katya, if you could leave, if you could return to your village or go anywhere in the world with enough money to live comfortably, would you?" Tears welled in the old woman's eyes. "My village is gone, my lady. Abandoned 20 years past. My family, if any still live, would not know me. I am too old to start anew. This castle is my prison, yes, but it is also the only home I have left." Over the following days, Marguerite sought out the other servants, 8 in total ranging in age from 50 to 80. Each had a similar story of survival through invisibility, of lives spent in the shadow of death, of hope slowly extinguished by the grinding weight of years. And Marguerite decided that this, at least, was something she could change. On the 7th night of her residence, Dracula came to her chambers as darkness fell. He found her in the sitting room, surrounded by papers and ledgers she had discovered in the castle's administrative wing. "You have been busy," he observed, taking in the organized chaos of her work. "I have been learning about my new household," Marguerite replied, not looking up from the document she was studying. "Did you know that you have 8 human servants who have been here for an average of 35 years each, that they are fed barely enough to survive, that they have no wages, no days of rest, no hope of ever leaving?" Dracula was quiet for a moment. "They are tribute from the villages, part of an agreement older than living memory. They serve in exchange for my restraint in other matters." "They are slaves," Marguerite said, finally meeting his eyes. "And I will not be mistress of a household that practices slavery. And what would you have me do? Release them into the mountains to die? They are too old to travel, too broken to start new lives. Then we give them what they need to do so." Marguerite stood, her voice firm despite the fear fluttering in her chest. "We provide them with wages, back wages for their years of service. We arrange for their safe passage to wherever they wish to go, whether that is to living relatives or to a city where they can live out their remaining years in peace. And we end this barbaric tribute system. No more young people sent as sacrifices to feed your brides or serve in your halls." Dracula's expression was unreadable. "You would dismantle arrangements that have kept these villages safe for generations." "Safe?" Marguerite's voice rose with passion. "They are not safe. They are terrorized. They sacrifice their children to appease a monster. That is not peace, my lord. That is oppression, and I will not, be party to it." The Count moved closer, and Marguerite felt the full weight of his presence, the ancient power that radiated from him like cold from ice. "You forget yourself, wife. You are in my castle, surrounded by creatures who would tear you apart if I gave the word. You have no power here except what I grant you." Marguerite stood her ground, though her legs trembled. "Then I have no power. But I have my voice, and I will use it. I will speak truth even if it costs me everything. You married me knowing I was a woman of faith, of principle. Did you expect me to abandon those things simply because they are inconvenient to your established order?" For a long moment, they stared at each other, the ancient vampire lord and the mortal woman who refused to be cowed. Then, to Marguerite's surprise, Dracula laughed. It was a sound rusty with disuse, but genuine. "You are either the bravest fool or the most foolish brave woman I have ever encountered," he said. "Very well. You wish to free the servants? To end the tribute system? I will allow it. But know this. If the villages rise against the castle without the old agreements in place, the consequences will be on your head." "I accept that responsibility," Marguerite said immediately. "And I have a proposal for the villages. Instead of tribute, we offer trade. The castle has resources. The Count has wealth, surely. We can purchase what we need from the villages at fair prices. We can employ skilled workers for wages, with the understanding that they are free to leave at any time. We can build a relationship based on mutual benefit rather than fear." Dracula studied her with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been calculating whether she was worth more effort to break. "You wish to reform a vampire's castle, to bring morality to a domain built on death and darkness. Do you truly believe that is possible?" "I believe that nothing is impossible with faith and effort," Marguerite replied. And I believe that you are more than just a monster, or you would have killed me the moment I challenged you, rather than standing here debating the merits of fair labor practices." Another laugh, this one almost warm. "You see things in me that do not exist, Marguerite. Or perhaps I see things you have forgotten existed," she countered. The Count turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the mountains. "Very well. Free your servants. Pay them their blood money. Send them away to whatever futures await them, and let us see if your compassion can truly change anything in this place of eternal night." "Thank you," Marguerite said quietly. "I know you think this is foolish." "I think it is doomed to fail," Dracula interrupted, "but I find myself curious to watch you try. You are unlike anyone I have ever met, Marguerite. You look at monsters and see souls worth saving. You enter darkness and insist on lighting candles. It is maddening and fascinating in equal measure." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The brides have been quiet lately. Too quiet. Be careful. They are cunning, and they will seek ways to hurt you that do not technically violate my commands. Do not give them opportunities." After he left, Marguerite allowed herself to sink into a chair, her body shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. She had challenged a creature of immense power and somehow won the confrontation. But she knew the victory was small and fragile. Still, it was a beginning. The following weeks brought changes to Castle Dracula that it had not seen in centuries. Marguerite met with each servant individually, explaining that they were free to leave with generous compensation for their years of service. She expected them to depart immediately, to flee this place of horror as quickly as their aged legs could carry them. Instead, something unexpected happened. Katya was the first to speak. "My lady, I have nowhere to go, but if you would permit it, I would like to stay, not as a slave, but as a paid servant. This castle is the only home I remember, and for the first time in 40 years, it feels like there might be hope within these walls." One by one, the others echoed similar sentiments. They were too old, too worn, too disconnected from the world beyond the mountains. But more than that, they had seen something in Marguerite that they had not seen in decades. Genuine kindness, the possibility of dignity, a reason to take pride in their work rather than simply surviving another day. In the end, 6 of the 8 chose to stay. The other 2, a brother and sister who still had family in distant cities, accepted Marguerite's offer of passage and payment with tears of gratitude. For those who remained, life in the castle began to change. Marguerite ensured they were properly fed, that they had comfortable quarters, that they received a day of rest each week. She asked their opinions on household matters and listened to their suggestions. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the castle began to feel less like a crypt and more like a home. The servants in turn began to smile, to speak above whispers, to take pride in their work rather than simply going through motions of survival. Even the castle itself seemed to respond. Rooms that had been closed for decades were opened and cleaned. Gardens that had gone wild were tended with gentle hands. Candles were lit in long-abandoned corridors, pushing back the darkness by inches and feet. And in the library, where Marguerite spent many daylight hours, she discovered something that would change everything. She had been reading through old family histories, trying to understand the man her husband had been before he became the monster he was now. Most of the texts were in languages she could not read, Old Romanian, Latin, even older tongues that seemed to predate any language she knew. But then she found a journal, written in English by a monk who had lived in the castle in the 15th century, before Dracula's transformation. The entries were fragmentary, damaged by time and moisture, but what she could read painted a picture that broke her heart. Prince Vlad is a man of great contradictions. He is capable of immense cruelty, yes, but also of unexpected kindness. Today he found me weeping over my sister's death, and he sat with me for hours, speaking of his own losses, his wife, his brother, his faith. He said that grief is the price we pay for love, and that he would gladly pay it again if it meant he could have those he loved back, even for a moment. Another entry, dated several months later. The prince grows darker. The war takes more from him each day. He no longer speaks of faith or love, only of vengeance, only of ensuring his enemies suffer as he has suffered. I fear for his soul. And finally, an entry dated just weeks before the monk's own death. He has done something terrible, something that has sundered his connection to God and to his own humanity. He came to me covered in blood that was not his own and begged me to pray for him. But when I began to recite the liturgy, he screamed and fled. I do not know if he can be saved. I do not know if he even wishes to be, but I will pray for him until my last breath, for I remember the good man he once was, and I cannot believe that man is entirely gone." Marguerite closed the journal with trembling hands. This was what she had suspected, what she had hoped. Her husband was not born a monster. He had been made into one by pain and loss and choices made in desperation, which meant, perhaps, he could be unmade. Not returned to full humanity, that was likely impossible, but redeemed, given back some measure of the soul he had surrendered. That evening, when Dracula came to her chambers, she showed him the journal. "I found this in the library. This monk, Brother Andre, he knew you before your transformation. He remembered you as a man capable of kindness as well as cruelty, a man who grieved and loved." Dracula stared at the journal as if it were a serpent poised to strike. "That man is dead." "Is he?" Marguerite asked gently. "Or is he simply buried beneath centuries of pain and anger? You created a chapel for me when you find religious symbols painful. You allowed me to free the servants when you could have stopped me with a word. You defended me against the brides when you could have let them torment me. Those are not the actions of a creature with no humanity left. Those are the actions of a creature playing a game," Dracula said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are they?" Marguerite moved closer, and for the first time she reached up and touched his face. His skin was cold as marble, but she did not flinch. "Tell me truthfully, is this still a game to you? Or has something changed?" For a long moment he did not answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he whispered, "I do not know, and that terrifies me more than anything I have faced in 500 years." Marguerite's heart ached with the weight of his confession. She took his hand, cold, lifeless, yet somehow still capable of a gentle grip, and held it between both of hers. "Then let me help you discover the answer," she said. "You do not have to face this alone. Whatever darkness dwells in you, whatever sins you have committed, you do not have to carry them in isolation. That is what marriage means, bearing burdens together." Dracula looked at their joined hands, at the stark contrast between her living warmth and his deathly cold. When he finally met her eyes, she saw something in his gaze that shook her to her core. It was hope, fragile, terrified, barely more than a spark, but it was there. "You will fail," he said. "You will exhaust yourself trying to save a soul that cannot be saved, and in the end you will hate me for the effort I cost you." "Let me worry about that," Marguerite replied with a small smile. "You have spent centuries convinced of your own damnation. Perhaps it is time you let someone else be the judge of whether redemption is possible." What neither of them saw was the shadow at the door, a Lyra, listening with growing fury to every word. The game was not supposed to go this way. The mortal was supposed to break, not heal. She was supposed to be corrupted, not transform the very castle around her. Something had to be done. The brides would have to act, and soon, before this pathetic mortal woman accomplished the impossible, before she saved the monster they had helped create. Winter settled over the Carpathian Mountains with brutal finality. Snow piled against the castle walls like siege works, and the wind howled through the stones, with voices that might have been ghosts, or might have been merely the mountain's breath. But inside Castle Dracula, for the first time in centuries, there was warmth. It was not the warmth of fires alone, though Marguerite had ensured that every hearth was properly tended. It was the warmth of human presence, of laughter echoing through halls that had known only screams, of servants who sang quietly as they worked, rather than moving in terrified silence. Marguerite had been in the castle for 2 months, and the changes she had wrought were undeniable. The servants now gathered for communal meals, sharing stories and companionship. The library had become a place of study rather than decay. Even the conservatory bloomed with renewed vigor, as if the plants themselves sensed the shift in the castle's atmosphere. And Dracula was changing in ways that frightened him more than any enemy he had ever faced. He found himself seeking out Marguerite's company, not out of obligation or curiosity, but out of genuine desire. Their evening conversations had become the center of his existence. She would tell him about her day, about the small victories of household management, or the passages she had discovered in ancient texts, and he would listen, drawn to her voice like a moth to flame, knowing he was being burned, but unable to pull away. She asked him about his past, and slowly, painfully, he began to tell her. Not the glorious tales of conquest and power, but the truth, the losses that had broken him, the choices that had damned him, the moment when he had cursed God, and God had seemingly responded by removing his grace entirely. "I was a man once," he told her one evening as they sat in the library, snow falling beyond the windows. a prince who believed in justice and the protection of my people. But war took everything from me. My wife threw herself from the castle walls when false news reached her that I had died in battle. My brother betrayed me to our enemies, and when I prayed to God for strength, for guidance, for anything, I heard only silence. Marguerite listened without interrupting, her hand resting gently on his. I made a choice then, Dracula continued, his voice hollow with ancient pain. If God would not help me, I would seek help elsewhere. I performed rituals that no Christian should know exist. I drank blood mixed with dark incantations, and I was transformed into this, a creature of power, yes, but also a creature cut off from everything that makes life worth living. Food tastes like ash, sunlight burns, and faith is agony. But you still feel pain, Marguerite said softly. You still grieve what you lost. That means you are not entirely dead inside. The capacity for suffering is also the capacity for redemption. Dracula turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. How can you believe that? How can you look at me knowing what I am, knowing what I have done, and still believe I can be saved? Because I have seen you change, she replied simply. The man who freed the servants, who created a chapel for his wife even though religious symbols cause him pain, who sits with me night after night discussing philosophy and faith, that is not the action of a creature beyond redemption. That is the action of a soul crying out for salvation. He reached up and touched her face, his cold fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with unexpected tenderness. You have given me something I thought I would never feel again, Marguerite. Hope. It is a terrible gift because hope requires the possibility of disappointment. But I find I would rather feel that terrible hope than feel nothing at all. For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken emotions hanging between them. Then Marguerite did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward and kissed him. His lips were cold, lifeless, but he responded with a gentleness that belied his monstrosity. When they parted, there were tears on, not of fear or sorrow, but of recognition. She saw in his eyes what she had hoped to find, the man he had been, trapped inside the monster he had become, desperately trying to claw his way back to the light. I love you, she whispered. Not the vampire, not the count, not the legend, but the wounded soul inside who still remembers what it means to be human. Dracula closed his eyes, and for the first time in 500 years, he wept. No blood tears, but the memory of salt water, the ghost of human grief. I do not deserve your love. None of us deserve the love we receive, Marguerite replied. That is what makes it grace. They did not notice the shadow at the library door, or the 3 pairs of eyes burning with jealous fury. The brides held council in the deepest crypt of the castle, where even Dracula rarely ventured. The ancient stone walls were carved with pagan symbols predating Christianity, and the air was thick with the scent of old death. This cannot continue, Alira hissed, her beautiful face twisted with rage. The mortal has corrupted him completely. He speaks of hope, of redemption. Soon he will reject us entirely, will reject his own nature, and where will that leave us? We should kill her, Marischka said flatly. Drain her dry and leave her corpse for him to find. Let him understand the price of weakness. We cannot, Verona reminded them. He has explicitly forbidden us from harming her. To disobey would mean our destruction. He is still the master here, no matter how besotted he has become. Then we must be clever, Alira said, her eyes gleaming with malice. We cannot harm her directly, but there are other ways to destroy her. Ways that will break her spirit as surely as fangs would break her flesh. What do you propose? Marischka leaned forward, interested. Alira smiled, and it was a terrible thing to behold. The mortal loves him. She believes she can save him. But what if we show her the truth of what he is? Not just tell her, but make her witness it with her own eyes. Let her see him feed, see him kill, see the monster in full flower. Her faith may be strong, but surely even she cannot maintain love and compassion when confronted with the reality of his nature. You wish to orchestrate a situation where he must reveal himself, Verona said slowly. But how? He has been restraining himself since her arrival, feeding on animals rather than humans, avoiding the villages, acting almost civilized. Then we remove his restraint, Alira replied. We bring prey to him in her presence, living, bleeding, begging prey, and we ensure that his hunger, which he has been suppressing for weeks, overwhelms his control. She will watch him become the monster, and her love will turn to horror. It will break her far more effectively than any physical torture. The 3 brides laughed, the sound echoing through the crypt like the screaming of the damned. 3 nights later, Marguerite was in her chapel praying when she heard screams echoing through the castle. Her first instinct was to stay safe behind her locked door, but the screams were human, a young voice, terrified and in pain. She grabbed a candelabra and ran into the corridor. The screams were coming from the main hall, and as she descended the stairs, she saw a scene that froze her blood. A young man, barely more than a boy, was being held by Marischka, her fingers like claws digging into his shoulders. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, and the scent of his blood filled the hall with an almost visible miasma. And there, standing before the victim, was Dracula. His eyes had gone red as blood, his fangs were fully extended, and his entire body was rigid with barely controlled hunger. "My lord," Alira purred from the shadows, "we found this thief trying to steal from your castle. Surely such disrespect deserves punishment, and you have been denying yourself for so long. You must be so very hungry." Dracula's gaze locked on the boy's throat, where the pulse beat frantically beneath skin. His hands were shaking, his breathing ragged. Marguerite could see the battle raging within him, the human consciousness trying to maintain control against the vampire hunger that demanded blood. "Let him go," Marguerite's voice rang out across the hall. Everyone turned to look at her, the brides with satisfaction, the boy with desperate hope, and Dracula with something that might have been shame or might have been warning. "Marguerite," the Count's voice was strained, barely human. "Go back to your chambers. You should not see this." "Let him go," she repeated, walking down the stairs with far more confidence than she felt. "He is a boy, a child. You will not feed on a child while I draw breath." "You do not command here, mortal," Verona hissed, "and the master is hungry. Why should he deny his nature for your delicate sensibilities?" Marguerite reached the bottom of the stairs and walked directly toward Dracula, putting herself between him and his intended prey. She was close enough to see the inhuman hunger in his eyes, to smell the scent of death that clung to him when the monster was fully ascendant. "Because he is more than his hunger," she said firmly, "because he has spent weeks proving that he can be more than a monster, and because I believe in him, even if he does not believe in himself." "Move aside," Dracula growled, and it was the voice of the vampire, not the man. "You do not understand what you are asking. I am starving. I have denied my nature for too long, and the hunger is overwhelming. If you do not move, I cannot guarantee your safety." "Then feed on me," Marguerite said simply. The hall went absolutely silent. Even the boy stopped whimpering, shocked into stillness by the offer. "What?" Dracula's eyes flickered between red and dark, confusion breaking through the hunger. "If you must feed to survive, then feed on me," Marguerite repeated. She tilted her head to the side, exposing her throat. "I offer myself willingly, but you will not touch that boy. You will not become the monster they want you to be. You will not surrender everything you have worked to reclaim, simply because the hunger is difficult to bear." The brides hissed in frustration, realizing their plan was backfiring spectacularly. Dracula stared at Marguerite's exposed throat, at the pulse beating steadily beneath her skin. The hunger roared through him like wildfire, demanding satisfaction. But beneath that hunger, something else stirred. Horror at the thought of harming her, admiration for her courage, and a desperate desire to prove himself worthy of the faith she had placed in him. "No," he said, and his voice was becoming more human again. "No, I will not feed on you, and I will not feed on the boy." He turned to Marischka. "Release him, immediately." "But my lord," she began to protest. "Now!" The command was absolute, backed by 5 centuries of dominance and power. Marischka dropped the boy, who stumbled toward Marguerite. She caught him, steadying him with gentle hands. "Katya," Marguerite called out, and the old servant appeared from a doorway where she had been watching in terror. "Please take this young man to the kitchens. Feed him, tend his wounds, and then escort him safely off the grounds with enough money to see him home." As the boy was led away, Marguerite turned back to her husband. The red had faded from his eyes, but he looked diminished somehow, drained by the effort of maintaining control. "You should not have done that," he said quietly. "You should not have put yourself at risk for a stranger." "He was not a stranger," Marguerite replied. "He was a soul in danger, and I could not stand by and watch you destroy yourself to satisfy a hunger that can be managed through other means." "Other means?" Alira laughed bitterly. "What other means? He is a vampire. He requires blood to survive. Would you have him drink from animals like a beast? Starve himself into weakness? I would have him maintain his humanity by any means necessary," Marguerite shot back. "And yes, if that means feeding on animals, Then so be it. Better a living monster who fights his nature than a powerful one who surrenders to it completely. Dracula looked at his wife, this mortal woman who had somehow become the center of his world, and felt something crack inside his chest. The hollow place where his heart had once beat suddenly ached with an intensity that took his breath away. "You three," he said to the brides, without taking his eyes off Marguerite, "you are banished from this castle. You have 1 hour to gather whatever belongings you wish to take, and then you will leave and never return. If you attempt to harm Marguerite or any under my protection, I will hunt you down and destroy you myself. Is that understood?" The brides stared at him in shock and fury. "You cannot be serious," Verona whispered. "We have been with you for centuries. We are your companions, You are my mistake," Dracula interrupted. "I created you out of loneliness and desperation, and I have allowed you to persist out of habit, but you are not my equals. You are not my companions. You are reminders of my worst impulses, and I no longer wish to be reminded. You will regret this," Alira spat. "When the mortal is gone, and all mortals die, my lord, you will be alone again, utterly and completely alone, and you will remember this moment and curse yourself for it." "Perhaps," Dracula agreed, "but that is a future problem. For now you have 59 minutes. I suggest you use them wisely." The brides fled, their rage palpable, their threats echoing through the corridors. But they fled, because for all their power they were nothing compared to the ancient force that was Count Dracula when his will was fully engaged. When they were gone, Marguerite swayed slightly. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was fading, leaving her weak and shaking. Dracula caught her before she could fall, sweeping her into his arms with surprising gentleness. "You foolish, brave, impossible woman," he murmured. "You could have been killed. You could have been turned into a creature like them. And you walked toward me anyway." "I told you," Marguerite said, her voice tired but content. "I love you, and love means believing in someone, even when they do not believe in themselves." He carried her back to her chambers and laid her gently on the bed. For a moment, he simply looked at her, this woman who had somehow accomplished the impossible, who had reached into the darkness of his soul and found light where he was certain none remained. "I do not know if I can be fully redeemed," he said quietly. "The things I have done, the lives I have taken, they are beyond forgiveness. But you have given me something I never thought to feel again. You have given me the desire to try, to be better than I was, to honor your faith in me, even if I can never fully deserve it." Marguerite reached up and took his cold hand in her warm one. "That is all anyone can do, my lord. Try, fail, try again. Redemption is not a destination, but a journey, and I will walk that journey with you for as long as I am able." The months that followed were not easy. Dracula struggled with his nature, with the hunger that never fully left him, with the weight of centuries of sin pressing down on his conscience. There were nights when he disappeared into the mountains, hunting animals to sustain himself, while fighting the urge to seek human prey. But Marguerite was always there when he returned, not judging, not condemning, simply present. She prayed for him in her chapel and spoke with him in the library. She reminded him of his humanity when he threatened to forget it, and she celebrated his small victories as if they were great triumphs. The castle continued to change. Villages that had once sent tribute in fear now sent traders bringing goods to sell. The servants, no longer slaves but paid workers, took pride in maintaining a household that felt alive rather than entombed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, light began to creep into corners that had known only darkness for hundreds of years. On a spring evening, as the snow finally melted and the first flowers pushed their way through the frozen earth, Dracula came to Marguerite's chambers with something in his hand. "I have something to tell you," he said, and his voice held a vulnerability she had never heard before. "I have been reading texts I had long ago dismissed as wishful thinking, and I have found possibilities." "Possibilities?" Marguerite asked, setting down her book. "There are rituals," Dracula said slowly. "Ancient ones, dangerous ones, but they suggest that a vampire who genuinely repents, who seeks redemption with pure intent, might be able to relinquish their immortality, to become mortal again, even if only briefly. The cost would be enormous, all the power, all the extended life, and the process would likely be agonizing. But," he trailed off, looking at her with eyes that held both hope and terror. "But you are considering it," Marguerite finished for him. "I am considering many things," he admitted. "I cannot undo what I have done. I cannot bring back those I have killed or restore the years I have stolen. But I can choose what I do with whatever time remains to me, and I find that I would rather spend 50 mortal years with you than 500 immortal ones alone." Marguerite's eyes filled with tears. "You would give up everything." "Everything I have is death and darkness," Dracula replied. "You have shown me what I could have instead: life, love, purpose. The chance to die as a man rather than persist as a monster. Is that not worth any price?" She stood and embraced him, feeling the cold of his body against her warmth. "Whatever you choose, I will support you. But you must choose for yourself, not for me. Redemption cannot be performed for someone else's benefit. It must come from your own soul's need." "Then let me tell you what my soul needs," Dracula said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "It needs to feel sunlight again, to taste food and find it sweet, to know that when I eventually die, it will be a true death, a natural end, not an eternal existence of spiritual decay. It needs to be human again, even if only for a little while, even if the process destroys me." "Will it destroy you?" Marguerite asked, fear creeping into her voice. "I do not know," he admitted. "The texts are unclear. Some suggest the transformation is survivable. Others imply that the shock of returning to mortality might kill instantly. But Marguerite, even if I have only 1 day as a mortal man, 1 hour to feel truly alive again before death takes me, would that not be better than an eternity of existing without living?" She thought about it carefully, praying silently for guidance. Finally she spoke. "If this is truly what you want, then I will help you. We will perform the ritual together, and whatever happens, you will not face it alone. That is what marriage means. Facing the unknown together, trusting in faith and love to see us through." Dracula kissed her then, and for the first time there was real warmth in it. Not the heat of living flesh, but the warmth of genuine emotion, of a heart that had remembered how to feel. The ritual took place on the night of the summer solstice, in the ancient chapel at the heart of the castle. Marguerite had spent weeks preparing, gathering the components described in the texts, purifying the space with prayer and holy water that made Dracula wince but which he insisted must be used. Father Vasile had come from the village at Marguerite's request, despite his fear of the castle. The old priest stood at the altar, holding a Bible and rosary, his face grave but determined. "Are you certain of this, my son?" he asked Dracula, using the form of address reserved for repentant sinners seeking absolution. "I am certain of nothing," Dracula replied honestly. "But I am certain that I cannot continue as I am. I have been dead for 5 centuries. It is time I either lived or truly died." The ritual was complex and agonizing. Dracula had to speak aloud every sin he could remember, and with 500 years of existence, there were many. He wept blood tears as he confessed to murders, cruelties, corruptions. Marguerite held his hand throughout, never flinching, never pulling away. Father Vasile led prayers of repentance and restoration, calling upon God's mercy for a soul that had been lost in darkness for so long. And as the sun began to rise beyond the chapel's eastern window, Marguerite performed the final part of the ritual, anointing Dracula's forehead with holy oil mixed with her own blood, given freely out of love. The moment the first ray of sunlight touched the chapel floor, Dracula screamed. It was a sound of such agony that Marguerite nearly lost her nerve, nearly tried to pull him back into the shadows. But Father Vasile held her steady, whispering that this was necessary, that transformation always involved pain. Dracula's body convulsed as centuries of dark power were burned away by light. His skin, which had been pale as marble, began to take on a more natural hue. His fangs receded. The red glow faded from his eyes, replaced by the deep brown they had been when he was still human. And then, most miraculous of all, his chest began to rise and fall, slowly at first, then more steadily, the breath of life, returning to lungs that had not drawn air for 500 years. Finally, as the sun fully crested the mountains and filled the chapel with golden light, the transformation was complete. Dracula collapsed, and Marguerite caught him, lowering him gently to the floor. For a terrible moment she thought they had failed, that the ritual had killed him rather than restored him. But then his eyes opened, fully human eyes, warm and alive, and he gasped like a man emerging from deep water. "I can breathe," he whispered in wonder. "I can feel my heartbeat. Marguerite, I am alive." She laughed and cried simultaneously, holding him close. "Yes, yes, you are alive." Father Vasile knelt beside them, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Welcome back, my son. Welcome back to the light." The days that followed were a revelation for Vlad, for that was his name now. Stripped of the title and legend of Dracula, he had to relearn everything. How to eat food that tasted of something other than ash, how to tolerate sunlight without burning, how to be tired, truly tired, and need sleep. His strength was gone. His immortality was gone. He was a mortal man in his 60s, for that was his actual age when he had made the bargain with darkness all those centuries ago. But he was alive, truly, genuinely alive, in a way he had not been since his first death. Marguerite watched him with joy and wonder as he experienced the world anew. He stood in the garden, feeling rain on his face and laughing at the sensation. He ate bread and honey and wept at the taste. He stood at the eastern window and watched the sun rise without fear, his face bathed in golden light. "I had forgotten," he told her one evening as they sat together watching the sunset, something he could now do without danger. "I had forgotten what it was to be human. The vulnerability, yes, but also the beauty. The way every moment feels precious because you know it will not last forever. I was immortal, but I was not alive. Now I am mortal, and I have never felt more truly alive." "How long do we have?" Marguerite asked gently, knowing that a man in his 60s did not have many years remaining. "The physicians I have consulted, discreetly, suggest perhaps 10 years if I am fortunate," Vlad replied. "Perhaps 15 if God is particularly merciful. It is not a long time by the standards of my previous existence, but Marguerite, I would take these 15 mortal years with you over 1,000 immortal ones alone. Then we will make every day count," she said, taking his hand. "We will live fully, love deeply, and when the time comes for you to face God's judgment, you will do so as a man who chose redemption over damnation, who chose life over eternal death." They lived together in the castle for 12 more years. Vlad used his remaining wealth to improve the lives of the villagers, building schools and hospitals, funding trades and ensuring that no family would ever again have to sacrifice their children to monsters. He became known not as the fearsome Count Dracula, but as Lord Vlad the Redeemed, a noble who had somehow overcome his own dark past to become a force for good. Marguerite remained at his side throughout, her faith never wavering, her love never diminishing. She grew older alongside him, her body aging while her spirit remained as strong and luminous as ever, and when Vlad finally died, peacefully in his sleep with Marguerite holding his hand, his last words were, "Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself. Thank you for showing me that redemption is always possible. Thank you for loving the man I could be rather than the monster I was." Marguerite buried him in the restored chapel, under a simple stone that read, "Vlad Draculesti, husband, redeemed, at peace." She lived for another decade after his death, maintaining the castle as a place of refuge for those who needed help, a sanctuary for the lost and broken. And when she finally closed her eyes for the last time, the servants who had loved her buried her beside her husband, united in death as they had been in life. The castle still stands in the Carpathian Mountains, though it is no longer a place of darkness. It is a school now, teaching the children of villagers to read and write, to think and question, to believe in the possibility of change and redemption. And on quiet nights, when the wind howls through the mountains and the moon rises full and bright, some claim to see two figures walking the ramparts hand in hand, one a tall man with kind eyes, the other a woman whose soul shines brighter than any external beauty could ever match. They say it is the Count and his bride, still together even in the hereafter, proof that love can conquer darkness, that faith can transform monsters, and that no soul is ever truly beyond redemption if someone is brave enough to believe in the possibility. The game that began as cruelty became the greatest victory of all, not because darkness was destroyed, but because light proved strong enough to reach into the deepest shadows and guide a lost soul home. And that, in the end, was worth any price. The end.